Chapter 13 of Mary Louise in the Country by L. Frank Baum. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 13. Bluff and Rebuff. The door was locked. Immediately Josie pounded upon it with her knuckles, and a voice demanded, "Who is there?" Instead of replying, Josie knocked again, and suddenly the door was opened and Old Swallowtail stood before her. I beg your pardon," she said diffidently. "Are you the real estate man?" "Yes," he replied, standing quietly in the doorway. "Then you're the man I want to see," she asserted, and took a step forward. But he did not move an inch from his position, and his eyes were fixed steadfastly on her face. "I have nothing to sell at present," he remarked. "But I want to give you something to sell," she retorted impatiently, summoning her wits to meet the occasion. "Let me in, please. Or do you transact all your business in the hallway?" Somewhat to her surprise, he stepped back and held the door for her to enter. Josie promptly walked in and sat down near a round table, one comprehensive glance fixing in her mind the entire contents of the small room. There was one window, dim and unwashed, facing the street. It had a thick shade, now raised. Originally the room had been square, and rather crudely plastered and wall-papered, but a wooden partition had afterward been erected to cut the room into two, so that the portion she had entered was long and narrow. Its sole furniture consisted of the round table, quite bare, two or three wooden-bottomed chairs, and against one wall a rack filled with books. During the interview she noted that these books were mostly directories of the inhabitants of various prominent cities in the United States, and such a collection astonished her and aroused her curiosity. Just at present, however, the partition proved the most interesting thing she observed, for beyond it must be another room which was doubtless the particular sanctum of Old Swallowtail, and to which she scarcely expected to gain admittance. The door was closed. It was stout and solid, and was fitted with both an ordinary door-lock and a hasp and padlock, the latter now hanging on a nail beside the door. This much Josie's sharp eyes saw in her first glance, but immediately her attention was demanded by Mr. Cragg, who took a seat opposite her and said in a quiet, well-modulated voice, "Now, my girl, state your business." She had planned to tell him how she had come to town to sew for Mary Louise Burrows, how she had finished her work but was so charmed with Cragg's Crossing that she did not care to leave it during the hot weather to return to the stuffy city. Therefore, she intended to add, if he would let her make some new dresses for Ingua, she would work for half her regular wages. Her dress as a sewing girl would carry out this deception, and the bait of small wages ought to interest the old man. But this clever plan had suddenly gone glimmering, for in order to gain admittance to the office and secure an interview with Old Swallowtail, she had inadvertently stated that she had some real estate to dispose of. So sudden a change of base required the girl to think quickly in order to formulate a new argument that would hold his attention. To gain time, she said slowly, "My name is Josie Jessup. I'm a sewing girl by profession." "Yes, I know," he replied. "I've been here 10 days or so working for Miss Burrows." "I have seen you here," said Mr. Cragg. She wondered how he knew so much, as he had never seemed to favour her with even a glance when by chance they met in the street. But perhaps Ingua had told him. "I like Cragg's Crossing," continued Josie, assuming a confidential tone, "and I've made up my mind I'd like to live here. There ought to be plenty of work sewing for the farmers' wives, outside of what Miss Huckins does, and it don't cost much to live in a small town. In the city I own a little house and a lot left to me by my uncle on my mother's side, and I've decided to trade it for some place here. Don't you know, sir, of someone who'd like to move to the city, and will be glad to make the exchange?" "I know of no such person," he replied coldly. "But will you make inquiries?" "It would be useless. I am very busy to-day, so if you will excuse me—" He rose and bowed. Josie was disappointed. She decided to revert to her first proposition. "Doesn't your grandfather need some sewing done, sir?" she asked, with a frank look from her innocent blue eyes. He stood still, silently studying her face. With one hand he rubbed his chin gently as if in thought. Then he said, "We cannot afford to hire our sewing done, but I thank you for the offer. Good morning, Miss Jessup." Walking to the door he held it open and bowed gravely as she walked out. Next moment she heard the key click as it turned in the lock. Josie, feeling a sense of failure, slowly went down the stairs, entered the store and perched herself upon the sugar barrel. Old Sol was waiting on a farmer's wife and only gave the girl a glance. Josie reflected on her interview with Mr. Cragg while it was fresh in her mind. He was no crude, uneducated country bumpkin, despite his odd ways and peculiar dress. Indeed, the man had astonished her by his courtesy, his correct method of speech, his perfect self-assurance. Her visit was calculated to annoy him and to arouse his impatience. After Ingua's report of him she expected he would become scornful or sarcastic, or even exhibit violent anger, yet there had been nothing objectionable in his manner or words. Still, he had dismissed her as abruptly as possible and was not eager to grasp an opportunity to exchange real estate. That isn't his business at all, she told herself. It's merely a blind, although he actually did rent the Kenton place to Colonel Hathaway. I wonder what he does in that office all day. In the inner room, of course. That is his real workshop. He's quite gentlemanly. He has a certain amount of breeding which Ingua wholly lacks. He must realize what a crude and uncultured little thing his granddaughter is. Then why hasn't he tried to train her differently? Really, he quite awed me with his stately, composed manner. No one would expect that sort of man to be a murderer. But, there, haven't I been warned that the educated gentleman is the worst type of criminal, and the most difficult to detect? Saul's customer went away, and the old man approached the barrel. "Well," he said, "want ter buy anything to-day?" "No," said Josie pleasantly. "This is only a social call. I've just come from Old Swallowtail's office and thought a word with you would cheer me up." "You? You been to Old Swallowtail's office? Sakes alive, gal, I wouldn't dare to do that myself." "Why not?" "He goes crazy when he gets mad." "Are you sure of that?" "Everybody here knows it, from the 3-year-olds up. What did you go to him for?" "A little matter of business." "And he slammed the door in your face?" "No, indeed." "That's funny," said old Sol, rubbing his forehead in a perplexed way. "He was very decent to me," continued Josie. "Acted like a gentleman. Talked as if he'd been to school, you know." "School? Well, I should say he had!" exclaimed the storekeeper. "Old Swallertail's the most educated man in these 'ere parts, I guess. Old Nick Cragg, his daddy, wanted for him to be a preacher, or priest most likely, and when he was a boy his old man paid good money to have him educated at a college. But Hezekiah warn't over religious, and 'lowed he didn't have no call to preach, so that's all the good the edication ever done him." "You've never felt the need of an education, have you?" asked the girl artlessly. "Me? Well, I ain't sayin' as I got no eddication, though I don't class myself in book larnin' with Old Swallertail. 3 winters I went to school, and once I helped to whip the school-teacher. 'Tain't every one has got that record. But eddication means more'n books. It means keepin' your eyes open, and gettin' on to the tricks of your trade. Every time I get swindled I've larned somethin', and if I started this store in New York instead of Cragg's Crossing, they might be runnin' me for president by this time." "But what would Cragg's Crossing have done without you?" inquired Josie. "It seems to me you're needed here." "Well, that's worth thinkin' on," admitted the storekeeper. "And as for Old Swallertail, he may have learned some tricks of his trade, too. But I don't know what his trade is." "Nobody knows. I don't believe that business of his'n is trade at all. I bet it's a steal, whatever its other name happens to be." "But he doesn't prosper." "No, he ain't got much to show for all these years. Folks used to think he'd got money saved from the sale of his land, till Ned Joslyn come here and dallied with Old Swallertail's savings and then took to the woods. It's generally believed that what Cragg once had, Ned's got now. But it don't matter much. Cragg hain't got long ter live, and his feed don't cost him and his little gal much more'n it costs to feed my cat." There was no further information to be gleaned from Sal Jerrems, so Josie walked home. End of Chapter 13. Read by Sabella Denton. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.